The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Aspect of its society, starting and also JK curriculum. So every aspect of educational constructs is there. The market, as you can see here, is a $60 billion market. We've been monitoring the statistics growth on a global basis, and what basically a few years ago was growing at about 28% is now starting to grow at 60% compound annual growth. So it's a big market. Obviously, Canada has declared that we want to maintain, I say maintain our status as a leader, as a supercluster, and I'll talk to you more about that. And I think that the reality is, in the journey that we're underway, is we're really going to have to really be creative in moving our leaders and our boards and our CEOs to actually apply the AI enabling technologies. So we have a situation where we've kind of got such a huge pervasiveness of small businesses in Canada, and the enablement to start learning there, because in AI you need a fair bit of data. So that's going to create a dynamic in Canada that will create some edginess about how could we leverage from these tools when maybe some of our internal data sets are just too small. So it's a big market. I think you got that point. In terms of the Canadian supercluster, the federal government announced the structure of our superclusters, and they declared where those funds would be allocated out across the different jurisdictions. And, so Vancouver was designated in Canada as the digital technology supercluster, very much focused around digital media. It's obviously, it's a very vibrant tech vibe out there. And then in terms of the sector for the manufacturing supercluster, obviously Ontario around the Enablement AI. And then you could see in Atlantic Canada, the ocean supercluster. And then in terms of Alberta, and sort of that regional area, Alberta in particularly strong in agriculture, was declared as one of the protein industries superclusters. So the federal government, at least in the Canadian landscape, is in really how these superclusters are structured, is that they're to bring funding dollars, and people are then creating. They've all put in their proposals. They're right now still working through all the legals of the IP, and obviously to create I'd call it like it's like creating a cluster of activity to see what sticks is maybe one way of looking at it, where different partners and contributors are trying to really stimulate innovation capacity. So that's been laid out. The overall funding, as you can see, is close to $1 billion. $1 billion actually doesn't go necessarily that far, but it's a stimulus is one way of looking at it. So these organizations that have put in the proposals have had to be very, very deep. They've put a lot of effort, and these are consortia structures as well. Where you're starting to see obviously the business, the academic, and the business folks come together to solve specific use cases. So this is going to be an interesting journey for the Canadian market as we see what unfolds and what actually, in terms of outcomes and outputs and products, can actually be tracked in the sense of driving an increased productivity and profitability to the Canadian economy. It's still too early to tell there, but a very powerful signal that the Canadian market has put in place. Now, in the local, when I say local, I mean Canada. I actually grew up out west in Edmonton, Alberta. And so it's been very interesting for me to see the incredible innovation that's going on out west, where Royal Bank of Canada, has really put its weight behind the Borealis Research Institute out there, and also Richard Sutton's research on machine intelligence. So he's very strong in particular methods of AI. And so that's a very strong nucleus. Obviously, been following Jeffrey Hinton's work, and in terms of his roots, obviously, which initially he's from Montreal, but he obviously has been a co-founder of the Vector Institute, and the focus there has very been around deep learning methods. We can talk a little bit more later if we have time about what these different methods mean, because one thing I've learned in this journey is there's probably over 300 or maybe 500 different AI methods and techniques. We have a long list over here of the different techniques and the methods, and every different particular problem set and type of data, you'd apply different methods. So, it's a very deep area of expertise. Fortunately, we just seem to have a lot of good people that are in the Canadian infrastructure, both at the academic level, but also with the stimulations. We're attracting a lot of researchers to come into certainly the research institutions, and obviously that's increasing some capacity for us as a nation. In terms of, kind of doing the bridge, that's kind of like big picture. By now, you can't not pick up the paper. It doesn't matter if you're reading the New York Times or you're reading the Globe and Mail or whatever you're reading. There is something on the news, on the wire every single day. And so it's a market that's moving incredibly fast. It's a new skill set for everyone in business. It's also a new skill set for us as, on the consumer side, and also to be very alert of where our data is going as well, and how that's going to manifest itself. So when we bridge to the sales side, which is obviously, our vested interest, we realize that the only way you can release trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars into any economy is to really accelerate the capabilities of salespeople, because they're the ones that are on the hook to drive the year-over-year revenue capacity. And so when we started our journey in this area, we realized that there was so much dissonance, in cognitive dissonance within, it's actually the human race, not just salespeople, but just very quickly, 50% of our cognitive skills as a human race we've lost in the last 10 years. What I mean by that is our ability to focus without another thought coming into our brains or being distracted. we very much are distracted, and it's impacting our productivity rates. Now, unfortunately, with B2B sales professionals, their productivity rates have declined from levels of 50% productivity to 36%. The research is underway that's pretty pervasive with certainly Accenture and other marquee brands. I wouldn't be surprised if we hit a 30% level either in 2018 or 19. Now, obviously, if we keep that declining then certainly we can be highly replaced by other more efficient, automated solutioning approaches. And so that's kind of the trajectory, why you see some of the future economic forecasts that 50% of the jobs will be eliminated in the B2B space over the next 10 years. The other, I think, aspect here that we're particularly focused on solving, and I think we've done it now, but it's taken a lot of hard rigor and research and many AI methods, is we can absolutely advise every single sales rep and manager, every executive on the opportunities and the deals they should never possibly pursue at about 98% accuracy in a lot of our data sets. And that means we can see the future with AI, maybe 12 to 18 or 24 months in advance without the person doing anything. And so you can make choices. Now, obviously, you can only do that with mid to large enterprises with fairly large data sets, but not a surprise, the patterns of other footprints over time can be very, very telling statistically, and also the algorithms can learn about the behaviors of one individual and how successful they are and how they work versus another, and then also just in real time do the adjustments. So it's been an interesting, fascinating journey to build the product, but I can say with full confidence for mid to large enterprises, this is a slam dunk, and being able to filter what they should do and not do. In terms of the need for AI in sales, I think you've kind of got some snapshots there, but I'd like to kind of bring it back to a bigger kind of picture first. When you look at is AI top of mind by our global CEOs in terms of transformation? It's not yet. We're still in that emergence space. Certainly the large Fortune 500 are absolutely building out their data scientists. They're building out, like the TD with their acquisition of Layer 6, basically put in a chief AI officer. That's the first one we have in this country. One may start to wonder how many chiefs we need, but we have a chief AI officer there, a chief data officer, a CIO officer, a chief security officer. So, clearly as this moves over in time, we'll start rationalizing these roles. But there's no question a lot of the IT organizations quite across the country are much stronger in BI or business intelligence analytic practices, looking, I saw in the rear view mirror, versus understanding how advanced data sciences and machine learning practices and AI approaches can predict the future. So there's a huge skill set gap in most IT organizations. There's many folks starting to masquerade that they know what they're doing, but honestly, most of them don't. Got to be really, really careful about your attracting and developing recruitment of your talent. Unfortunately, in the world of sales, where these tools are, most sales organizations in the sales ops do not have the skills and competencies in these areas. So, they're either going to have to acquire talent or they're going to have to partner with people that have built out these skills and capacity. So it's an interesting, area, just to see what's unfolding there. In terms of the market dynamics, I'm just going to drill down a little bit more, just to give you a little bit more context about the value propositions based on the research. So what I find is always interesting, and McKinsey I think has done a fabulous job here. I mean, pretty well all the marquee analysts, researchers, everybody's building about an AI analyst practice. So I guess, you're in a high growth market when everybody wants to have something to say about it. But 3 out of 4 business leaders say predictive insights can drive better decisions. And I think that's a very important point. When these algorithms can go through and do the sense making and surface up the patterns that are the most valid and insightful for you to interpret, and can do it at a nanosecond of the cost that a human could do. And a human, quite frankly, often can't do this high level of computational logic. But the other point that I find quite fascinating is the companies that utilize the data in terms of these advanced analytics are increasing their capacity for customer retention, 6 times greater, 9 times higher profitability. So when you look at the market dynamic of, the leverage of the potential, we still have a lot of education. The research side there is definitely mature. The practices work. And obviously, most of the large technology vendors are obviously bringing more and more modernized tools into the hands of the end users, that might want to be more analytically inclined. The problem sometimes there, dare I say, is that the toolkits may be more basic analytics and not really be true AI. And so again, the devil's in the details on the marketing and the branding of what's real and what's not real. But tremendous activity there, and obviously you'll see these slides later. In terms of what I'd like to turn our attention to is I'd like to define a little bit more about what we mean specifically by predictive and prescriptive analytics, because that's obviously the world that we're living and breathing every single nanosecond here. So what's happening in the market? And I'm a former Xerox sales gal. I spent quite a few years there, former Accenture partner, venture capitalist, etc. Pretty well been around the CRM enablement space for quite some time, but also from a transformational change perspective, is that most of the sales B2B world is predicated around relationship selling and solution selling, right? And, so you want to listen to the voice of your customer. You want to hear what their needs are. You want to demonstrate that you understand, and you want to put forth the best solution in the best cost structure at the best point in time. Now, most organizations don't have the advantage of AI content enablement or AI-driven practices. So the humans spend a lot of time figuring that out on the solutioning set, and particularly in larger B2B sales cycles. We're not talking B2C, right? So what's happening though is that these wonderful little agents of change, AI algorithms, are going to start creating the solutions on the fly and advising. And so that's this whole arena that's opening up in the venture capital space around AI guided selling and sales enablement, but in a very deep AI kind of resilient way. So this is the whole way that salespeople will evolve as a competency is going to be very much around the guidance and the quality of the guidance systems to basically help them get their jobs done in the most rapid slice of time, but obviously that will reduce overhead in labor costs, etc. So that's kind of the big message on that whole sphere. It will surround every practice as a sales professional. And in time, I guess I might not be here on this earth, will absolutely displace certainly a number of the roles in sales because things will get that sophisticated. Now, in terms of, bringing it back down to what we do, because I always find these sessions, I always want to talk outside the box of what we do, and my team keeps me very much on track in marketing, saying, no, you need to speak to about what we do. But essentially, we've built a product that overlays on top of Salesforce data sets. We have an open API. We've just finished our first integration with NetSuite, so there'll be more news on that in the market. But essentially, we look at all the underlying patterns, and then we basically rank everything into A, B, C, D, F. We give it a score. It doesn't matter what the human says. We basically will have another point of view, and more often than not, we'll be more accurate than the human. Now, obviously, you look for the tonalities of the coherence there, but predictive analytics, what their job is to analyze all the patterns, all the metadata patterns, pick up the nuances, and we've determined what the win factors are that will guide a person to the right point of end game. And obviously, if you'd love to hop in, book a demo at some point, we could, dive in and show you in a more specific way than we're set up in this forum. The other thing that we've spent a lot of R&D time on, and it's taken us a long time to figure out this piece of the puzzle, and it's not that the AI algos can't stratify thing in every which way you might want. It's the piece that's challenging is what can the human consume? What can the human cognitively understand and process at a grade 7 level to comprehend, to do something, right? And it's not to say that our salespeople are at grade 7 comprehension. the issue is that the speed that they're running at, for them to have to think too hard, is a distress point in their psyche. And that, so a lot of the successes in AI enablement tools have to be on the simplicity and the elegance of the UI experience, and that a sales rep who's brand new gets it in a nanosecond, or a manager, and it has to still fit into the psychology or the lexicon interpretation of a sales professional. And so that's what takes a lot of design rigor, right? Because the AI algos are really good at showing all kinds of things that you might want to put together and visualize, but quite frankly, at the end of the day, it's the critical few versus the critical many. This slide, what it does is it quickly pulls out the win factors. So if you think about any sales cycle, there's certain attributions depending on what I'm selling, right? And so the software science automatically picks up the nuances of whatever you're selling, and are you in a sweet spot range or not, based on all of the depth of the patterns that correlate, and I say correlate, to the highest optimal track to have that win factor. And what's the significance of that? And most people understand 100% is a better number than 30%, right? I don't, so again, it's trying to give multiple views, but then showing you where are you in relationship to that. Am I? And so we basically say check, yeah, check is good. And then what's the number that you have, and you can quickly know that you're in range, you're in the right threshold, the most optimal. And it varies from client to client, and I think that's where we've been quite clever. I think a lot of Mickey Mouse players, what they do is that they just say, okay, what are the win factors? The length of time, well, that's pretty, obviously the longer the sales cycle, your odds decrease. Yeah. They don't pick up all the patterns. So we're one of the very few vendors in the whole, ecosystem now that have showing the right patterns that are the most optimal. But it's taken us, a couple of years, maybe 3 years, to actually figure all these pieces out. In terms of, where I'd like to branch to now is just talk to you about some stories of some clients, because it's always nice to see who's who in the zoo. So before I bridge to that, I think it's important. We'd have to certainly applaud and recognize our partners along the journey. Obviously, we picked Salesforce because it gave us access to data sets and the app exchange, where we could easily download our app, but our entire platform's on the AWS footprint and with an open architecture. So, obviously, we've got the mobility, which is important, just given the speed of the market. But Accenture has been very gracious in providing us with very large data sets as we've been evolving. And also many mid-market players, and Relation Edge, who just was acquired by Rackspace, has been our US partner. So when you're in this early kind of ecosystem, you've got a pretty geeky, AI technical team. You really need to find change agents that really want to have an inquiry approach. Most salespeople are skeptical about, can AI really give them an edge? And so it's been interesting for myself to have those discussions with so many, and then the evidence is always where they move off their position. So it takes 5 minutes to plug us in. We see where you're at, and we give you an immediate diagnosis in less than a day on whether we believe something will happen or not. And we have an audit trail. And so we kind of bookended them. And one thing that salespeople I know are really strong at is they lead by facts, most of them, right? They're very evidence-based. Now, in terms of, remember we were talking about earlier, and I know you can't read all of this, and nor would I recommend that you try and learn all of these things. But what we've tried to do here to keep our, I'd call it our skills learning, is constantly try and understand what are the different methods in AI that could create and enable different solutions. And, I just want to illustrate, this isn't all of them. I'll just give you an example. We were into a discussion with a client recently because we built out now our professional services, data sciences, and AI team, mainly because not everybody's ready for all the toolkits. So they need a lot of, help me with the strategy. Can you take this data set and can you apply a natural language algorithm overlay and let us know, are there patterns in there that could lead to a chatbot? So, kind of that experimental, agility. But just on clustering alone using AI methods, I thought maybe we had 3 or 4 methods, and then we dug into some heavier research with some of our partners and other academic experts, and they said, no, with clustering algorithms with AI, we probably got about 100 or 200 different methods, not the algorithm, but just the actual methods. So, what's interesting in this space, and this is probably the most important second point to remember, you've got the oxygen point, but I would say, forget about the techie talk and just be clear about what is the use case and the problem that you want to solve with your data sets. Do you have enough volume is obviously key, and what's the quality of that. And so it's clean data, because although AI you can give a clean out quite a bit automatically now, but it still needs some underlying at least 50 to 55 or 60% of good pattern recognition to sort of get a intelligent base where the algos can continue to learn from, right? And in our case, the algos are being calculated every 5 minutes, so they're constantly learning as new inputs come in and new outcomes are being picked up. So that patterning is pretty precise. But the main point, again, is lots and lots of depth, and that might be one reason why a new PhD that's just finishing a PhD in AI and machine learning, the just fresh out of school, the baseline salaries are roughly around 200,000 up to, from a tier 1 school, some of them are achieving $1 million in a base salary. So when Harvard released its report that AI data scientists jobs are the sexiest in the world, they're absolutely right. But it does, and can other business people start to build their skill sets up in this area? Absolutely, but you've got to get deep into the weeds and appreciate these methods, because you can't do the solutioning, and that's the piece I'm the most worried about. You cannot do the solutioning with the clients and bring the right risk management dialogue to the table, because one AI hammer might want to prefer this method because they may only know those 3 skills, and there actually may be another pathway that's far more precise, far more rigorous, and will solve that particular use case in 10% of the time versus another method. So for our learning, it's been holy moly. Not only do we have to understand the technical side, but our business solutions people, they all need to be engineers, and they have to be able to dig deep and talk the techie talk, but also be able to challenge the AI folks as well. So the amount of competency increase here is really deep, which is one of the reasons that these professionals are achieving such high salary bases. Not going to say too much. Most of the stuff's online, but we've worked really hard to be recognized through the various analyst channels. We won the hottest AI company to watch through Aragon Research late last year. I'm privileged to say that soon, in mid-August, a big announcement will be out in the Canadian market. We'll be recognized for our disruptive research in AI. So I just want all of you listening to know that AI does work. And all you have to do is give us a call, and I know that you won't be disappointed, mainly because the UI experience is really quite slick and easy for salespeople to understand. The benefits here are essentially the forecasting accuracy can be up as high as 82% on a deal-by-deal basis. The piece here that we've been drifting, I should say drifting is the wrong choice of words, we've learned is the sales psyche is one that they're really proud of their forecasting processes, even though they may be broken. But the piece that they're always more concerned about is very much around the can I increase the capacity and get all my team to win. We've been faced in the sales arena for the last 30 to 60 years, actually. At least the last, about that time frame, that the mid-tier sales professionals don't usually make their plans in pretty well every large B2B company. So it's the upper tier, certain percentage, top 20% that make up for the middle performers, and then we move out at least 5 to 10% of our workforce every year in sales because they don't make their quota. Now, what we've done there is we've got a story that because they haven't hit their number, that's the problem. Well, in fact, that's actually not the problem. That's the outcome of the problem, but the problem is more that they're not getting the best coverage that have the best upside and potential to convert. And the marketing people, unfortunately, have often pushed so much at that aren't really qualified leads. And the science can figure out things so that can just happen dynamically. So that's the kind of compression that's going on. Versature is a Canadian, SaaS company in the VoIP area, and they've been one of our customers for about the last, I think, about year, I believe, Malay. And their CMO and chief sales officer there, they've had tremendous results. And what they've done, which I think was quite clever, she just starts her sales meeting every Monday morning. Salespeople always have their, drill down meetings. Usually it's Monday morning or later in the day, but they always have them. Quick, I won't say them scrum, but are we on point and what's happening, and especially on the larger accounts and that dialogue that everybody participates in. But they lead with the data completeness and, and kind of that hall of shame. They're at 99% data completeness in their Salesforce instance, which is unheard of. So you expect to see more news on that coming up from our marketing, messaging. But, it's an example you can get there, but if you want AI to be good, you got to recognize as a sales leader, you need the data to be complete as much as you can and be accurate. Most companies won't achieve what Versature has in data completeness, but if you don't strive, you're not going to be able to get to that breakthrough in AI without really being attentive to, making, honestly, data is a very core strategic asset now of every single company. And we've missed probably a lot of generations of not appreciating that depth and rigor. So in terms of best practices, when you step back, there's so many. It's hard to pick all the right ones, but I'll just talk to quickly 6. I think the first one, I've reinforced a few messages on the importance of the data and getting the basics in place to be, I'd call it AI ready. And it doesn't matter what problem you're solving in AI, the same life cycle applies. You've got to have enough volume. You've got to have enough completeness. You have to have, if you don't have data dictionaries and meta structures, that can hurt you. But again, with deep learning methods and other methods, we can figure that out on the fly, right? So if your house is really in bad order and taxonomies and structures, don't worry about it, because science and the tools can figure out, those patterns. The other piece here is that there's a lot of stack fatigue going on in the whole software industry, right? Because you got to add on and add on and add on. And so you got to pick your partners wisely, and you got to be thoughtful about that. At the same time, if you know the use case that you're going to solve, you're probably going to find that the edgier players are stronger because they've gone very deep and they're not trying to generalize, and they work so much harder to please their customers than the big boys. And so I think that's important to understand is that not a surprise, but usually innovation and the best innovation thinking always lies on the edge. So just have that in the back of your minds. I'm excited by the recognition on a worldwide basis that all data patterns and all dots of all customer interactions can come together. It's going to take a lot of hard work, but with the amount of data that's out there in, that's in sort of the public domain, you can start threading patterns with AI that's very powerful and deep. I think there's a lot of concern around that in the sense of the data privacy, evolution of a regulatory environment. There's no question the technologists are out ahead of the regulatory environments. And we'll see what unfolds in Canada, because we're as progressive as we are, we certainly don't have an AI data regulatory framework around AI, and nor do we have a deep Canadian plan of how AI needs to deeply manifest and into each economic entity in this country. I would say that China is ahead by far than Canada on that positioning. And I recently read the plan for India, and was absolutely amazed at how pervasive their overall thinking has been. So we've certainly got some innovation clustering going on and some super clusters, but a very deep, thoughtful, aligned federal government framework and also provincial alignment frameworks, and all of those dots connected. There's a, it's going to take us a while, let's put it that way. So the other piece I should mention is explainable AI is important to understand, because when the laws do come down, they will, right? So beware of predictions that you don't have an audit trail on, that you can't explain, that one of the audit pieces we expect will be around ensuring that it's ethical and representative of different diversity profiles. I mean, so we do expect some gender bias gaps in a lot of data sets. And, I do expect that the regulatory controls will look to that. So there's going to have to be a lot of thoughtful risk management practices about the quality of that data set, how representative, and is it really drawing really valid statistical, predictions on the future that we want to put our names behind and our brands behind. So there's lots and lots of vendors that are not from the explainable AI camp, and we're not in that camp. I expect as the laws come out, things will get cleaned up. But just as a company, recognize you can have huge reputational risk if you don't internalize that explainable AI dynamic early. And the other one, obviously, is you got to get into the show. You got to get in. You got to do it. You might not know what to do, but if you don't plug in, you can't learn. And so we've just created very low barrier of entries for all of our clients. Just get in, plug in 5 minutes, and let's get going and see what you have and figure it out. So that kind of, I think, concludes. Is that, I believe, Emily, I think you can talk to the AI directory piece here.
Most definitely, Cindy, and thank you. That was most insightful and a rigorous explanation of just how important AI is and how the market is growing and just why we need to be there and what we need to look out for. Well, the key point underlying all of this is that we need the right resources, the right individuals knowledgeable in this space to interact with in order to learn all of these good stuff. And that is the reason this platform that you see on your screen was launched. It's called the AI Directory, and it was launched as a joint venture between SalesChoice, CATA, which is the Canadian Advanced Technology Alliance, and IT World Canada back in December. Initially, as a forum to bring together all stakeholders in the AI ecosystem, that includes institutions as well as individuals. But the platform took off very rapidly, and soon enough it expanded to include US institutions and has now also incorporated close to 300 Chinese institutions. This platform is very much live and available to you to register on. If you are interested in the AI space, you will get to see a lot of news around the AI domain, as well as research and the papers that Cindy mentioned coming out of China, India, US. All of those resources and materials are accessible on this platform. So please feel free to go ahead and register. The domain is www.aidirectory.ai. And the only qualifying factor is that you should have a direct engagement with the artificial intelligence industry. But please feel free to reach out to us should you have any questions. With that, we'll just move to the final elements of our agenda. We come to the Q&A. So if you have any questions, please do fire in. As Cindy was speaking on the issue of data quality, we did get one question on that topic. So Cindy, I'll just quickly share that with you. The question was, you mentioned how the data quality issue was solved at Versature, with them having achieved 99.9% completion. How exactly did your software enable something like that?
Okay, thanks. Okay, I'll try and net that out as clearly as I can. So what happens when you plug in with our software is that we immediately classify the most significant patterns in your data set that correlate to getting to successful outcomes or win outcomes or predictive outcomes. That stratification then becomes a very visible series of fields that obviously that relate to the client's data set. and then they get an immediate lens on their completeness across the most important factors down to factors that maybe point to relevancy. Typically, when things are below that are of lower relevancy, we don't even bother with the display. So once that comes up, the client has an immediate dashboard view of where I'm at. Where's Cindy at in her data set? Where's Charlie in her data set against the most significant patterns? So that creates a framework to lead, to whip the team into shape. You start off your meetings, and nothing motivates salespeople more than halls of shame. I've worked with halls of shames over the years. They like to be on the winning scorecard. So what happens is the peers actually start to essentially challenge the other peers. So she just started to just lead her meetings that way. So Sales Choice enables a view of data completeness and where you're at. But the real importance is the leader leading the conversation with their respective reps. And so we're now building out best practices, tips and techniques, getting the voice of our other customers. It's kind of been interesting. A lot of our customers have now become board advisors or board champions. It's like now that they've drank the Kool-Aid, they really want to be part of our parade. And that usually is an indication you're on to something. It's still emerging, but I must say that actually almost most of our clients are ambassadors in some way, finding clients for us, helping. They really do want to get guided AI selling on the right track, in the industry and start to transform sales as we traditionally know it.
Right. Thank you for that, Cindy. We have another question, and this one reads, can you speak about how to best address the issue of reputational risk? Because with faster response times, there may be greater exposure. Should we have controls in place for that?
You talking about the data side? Is that the question related to the reputational risk of interpretation of signals? Is that kind of where we're coming from?
I would suspect it reads, so I would suspect that is what is being referred to.
All right. Well, I think it's like with any, it doesn't matter what you're doing and what you're producing in this world, you should have a good audit framework around you might not know the actual algorithmic patterning, but you at least need to know what's in the soup mix and the different kinds of methods that are being applied, and are they scientifically sound. And so if you're not digging in as a supplier to understand the methods, the specific methods that are being used to derive an outcome, then you're obviously at risk of something potentially being produced, creating a process, whether it's your internal employees or your external partners, etc., where you could be at risk of really, I think we'll see cases, Malay, that things are actually fraudulent. They're so error oriented, and the buyer didn't do their homework or ask the right questions, and not that it was intentional, right? It's just that they didn't have the skills to know the right questions to ask. So I think this whole area of reputational risk is going to be huge, and I think that's why all the audit firms are building out their practices on AI, ethics, security, reputational risk. I think we'll start to see that software companies can, have some kind of an explainable AI, audit that, and a third party will say, yep, these guys are okay in their methods. But yeah, there's gonna be lots of industries spun out here. That's like within every kind of major change, you need all the checks and balances to come in around. So
Thank you, Cindy.
That's a good question.
Thank you, Cindy. And one more question I see: how can we adopt AI in organizations successfully when salespeople are so resistant to change?
Oh yeah, well, the devil's always in the detail. It's like with any kind of change process. If the sales individuals are resistant to change, then obviously from our side, we'd say we don't have the right buyer profile, right? So in emergence, you've got to find the early adopters, right, that are open for learning, are open to have a discovery conversation, and obviously are analytically oriented. It's once the adoption starts to happen, and then those stories start to spread, which they're now getting into the market, then the others come along. the interesting dynamic, I think, is the chief marketing officers, are far more analytically oriented, but often they're disconnected from the outcomes, the real tough outcomes of the salespeople. So I think that, there's different buyer profiles that one has to approach. But again, it's a bit of art and it's a bit of science in coverage, I think, is really the right answer there, I would say. Always got to pick your spots. We all know that, right? You got to pick your spots.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Cindy. That has been most helpful indeed. We have now arrived at the end of our webinar for today. In closing, I would just like to briefly introduce you to the Predictive AI world. In case you are unaware, this forum from the House of Sales Choice brings together senior experts, strategists, executive leaders into a thought leadership forum where they share their experiences, their insights to help organizations tackle pressing issues in the domain of AI as well as sales in general. We have had several sessions on the webinars, as you can see on the left side of your screen. We also have podcasts to accompany them, wherein the first one on the screen actually is from our Versature case study, where you can hear the client speak to her experience leading the team to that amazing data quality numbers. We also have a video library wherein one of specific importance came from EY in our partnership with them as we produce a joint video series with Kathy Kobe, a partner at EY Canada, to discuss how executive leaders can best manage the risks of AI. And there are some great insights on ethical fronts as we tackle diversity, we tackle the adoption, the role that board leaders have to play. All in all, great set of stuff. You can visit saleschoice.com/resources to take a look at your leisure and go through each of these. For now, I would like to thank all of you for your patience. It has been truly wonderful taking you through those insights and learning it. You have been hearing Dr. Cindy Gordon, founder and CEO of Sales Choice, and myself, Malay Upadhyay, Director of Marketing and Strategic Alliance at Sales Choice. And we are truly, truly privileged to have you here. Look forward to seeing you again in our next session. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye bye.